Hey guys, Jasmine here from Feeling Nifty Painting Tutorials. Today you're going to learn how to paint this fresh and vibrant tulips in a jar painting with acrylics, which is a really nice springtime painting to do. So our first step is we're going to do the background. So we're going to pick up our 3/4 flat brush and we're going to double load it with white and black paint. So on one side of the paintbrush, we're going to pick up some white. And the other side, we're gonna pick up black in equal amounts. Just like that. And then we're gonna do up and down brush strokes and apply that background. And when your brush runs out of paint, you're going to reload it the same way. So half white, half black. And that's gonna give us really nice streaky background. Just like that. The more streaky, the more imperfect, the better here. So just have fun and use those up and down brush strokes. And if you also find your paint is looking a little scratchy and it's not really spreading, just add a little bit of water onto your brush. And then load it up with paint. That just thins down the paint a little bit and lets it flow a little bit easier on your on your canvas. So we want this color to be nice and dark. We don't want it to be too light because we want to give a lot of nice contrast with the nice pink blooms coming in the later steps. So we want it to be like a dark charcoal gray, but of course there's going to be streaks. So there's going to be streaks of lighter gray in there. And you also want to remember with acrylics, they dry a shade or two darker compared to when they're wet. So to keep that in mind as well. So here you can see there's nice streaks of dark charcoal gray, and then there's a little bit of lighter gray in there as well. I always find painting in the background a super relaxing and stress-free part of the painting because it's so, you don't have to worry about getting all the shapes right. You're just trying to add paint right on your canvas. So you're going to do that all the way across your canvas until the entire canvas is covered with this dark charcoal gray streaky look. And also, if you're going to be hanging up this painting on your wall, you can go ahead at the step and add that same charcoal gray color on the sides of your painting. And when your canvas is completely covered and you're happy with the amount of paint you've added, we're going to wait for this to dry. And once it's dry, we're going to move on to the next step and we're going to sketch in our tulip flowers with a piece of chalk. All right, the next step once our background is dry is we're going to sketch in the basic shapes of our tulips and our jar. Now, you don't have to sketch it here. You can skip to the next step if you'd rather just paint it straight. But if you want to sketch it first, then you're just going to grab your chalk and we're going to start by sketching out our vase, which is basically just a simple circle right at the bottom center of your canvas. It's a basic round circle like that, half circle. And it's going to be about 5 inches wide and 4 inches tall. And then you're going to sketch in the neck of your jar, which is just basically a simple rectangle, and that's about 1 inch tall. And then we're going to sketch in our tulip shapes. Now, tulip shapes are very simple flowers, but they're simple when you break them down to simple shapes. So the way that I kind of dissected them was basically we want to trace in all of our front petals first, which are basically like teacup shapes. So they're kind of flat at the bottom and kind of like a U shape at the bottom. And then at the top, it's kind of like a tongue where it's a little bit wavy and like a heart shape at the top. So that's like the front petal shape of our tulip petal. So if you want to take a look at the shape of a real tulip, you'll see that it's not really oval or round. It's like a teacup shape and a little bit flat at the bottom of the flower. So these are our basic front petals of our tulips. Now we're going to paint, sorry, we're going to sketch the outer petals on all of these tulips to form the overall tulip shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the main front petal, and then we're going to draw the overlapping ones. So they're just like basic shapes like that. And again, at the top, it's a little bit wavy. They're not completely angular. It took me 3 times to do this painting to get the shape of the tulips just right. The first time they're a little bit pointy, and this time, the final time, I realized that they're not quite angular, they're a little bit wavy. So we're gonna do the next one over here, and we can do them in a variety of designs too. So some of these outer petals can be completely overlapping. So this one here is completely overlapping this one. These ones are kind of equal distance from each other with the front petal kind of still showing. So we're gonna do that for all of our tulips here. And then these ones, the smaller ones, we're going to have like mini petals that are at the back of the front petal. So they're not going to be overlapping towards the front. They're just going to be these little kind of horns on our flowers like that, petals. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to simply sketch in our stems just to give placement. Oops. And the nice thing with chalk is that it's easy to erase. There we go. So the next step, once you have your sketch on your canvas, is we're going to paint all the center petals of our tulips with a beautiful pink color. Now, I was mentioning before, quinacridone magenta is my favorite pink color, and especially when you mix it with white, it becomes a really beautiful pale bubble, almost like a bubblegum pink. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up 1 part or 2 parts white, and then we're going to pick up equal amounts of that quinacridone pink with our brush or a palette knife, and we're just going to mix it together. And you're going to see that it looks really dark right out of the tube, but once you mix it with white, it becomes this really, really beautiful, vibrant, almost like a violet pink. So once you have that really nice, beautiful pink color, we're going to load up our brush, and we're going to paint all of the centers of our tulips with it. So that center petal. We're just going to follow, and if you haven't done the sketch and you want to go right directly to painting, the center petals are going to be a U-shaped petal that's a little bit flat at the bottom, kind of like a teacup shape. And they're going to have 2 bumps at the top, kind of like a tongue. And actually the color of this pink is kind of like a tongue too. So we're just going to fill that out with a nice coat of pink. We'll make sure we have those 2 little bumps at the top. So then we're just going to move over to the next tulip, and we're just going to fill them all in. Now that the center tulip petals are dried, we're going to paint the outer petals of our tulips. Now to do that, we're going to actually lighten this color. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that original pink that we had created in the last step, and we're going to lighten it with a little bit of white. So I'm just going to move some over in a pile and create like a lighter version of that pink. And we want the contrast between the original pink and the lighter pink to be distinct. So here I find it's a little bit too similar, so I'm going to add in a little bit more of the titanium white. and just lighten it up. So there's a contrast between this pink and that pink right there. Brush. So we're gonna grab that light pink we just created and we're going to paint our outer petals. So those are the ones we traced in the first step. And if you are not tracing them in, so they're just going to be overlapping petals, and you're going to be following that same shape, that U shape at the bottom, like a teacup. And then at the top, you want it to be, have two little bumps, similarly as the center petal. And then we're going to pick up some more paint, and then we're going to paint this one with, these ones are going to be, these outer petals, these side petals are going to be equal distance from each other and not overlapping. So we're just going to follow our guideline there and just paint in those outer petals. That. Go. And then I grab a little more pink, light pink, and then we're gonna paint that big one, the focal point tulip. And this one, we're gonna do a different pattern here. We're going to create this one to be overlapping. So we're gonna paint the petal on the left on top, and then the one on the right is gonna be below. And then the next step, we're going to actually highlight the border between the petals so we can see them a little bit more. But in this step, we're just getting the paint on in that rough shape of that petal. Like that. Remember to do those two little bumps at the top. Oopsies. Go. So you can already see the tulip shape is taking form right there. All right, now that our basic tulip shapes are painted in, we're gonna paint the border around all of our tulips with a really nice dark color, so we can see the distinction between the petals. So to do that, we're gonna grab our smallest round brush and we're going to use pure quinacridone magenta right out of the tube. So we're not gonna mix it this time with any white. And so I'm going to mix it with a little bit of water just to thin it down, because I have really thick paints, and I find that if you're applying really fine lines with thick paint, it becomes really difficult. So thinning it down to be a more of a liquid consistent, not liquid, but thinner consistency, it just makes it easier to get those fine lines. Kind of like you'd want it to be like a gravy-like consistency. So I'm gonna twirl it on my brush, and then I'm just gonna go and paint a simple border around all of our side petals. That. And that's just gonna make all of our tulips pop. Just like that. And then what we're also gonna do here is we're gonna add, because the way the light is hitting down on the tulips, the bottom part of the tulips are going to have a darker shade. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create little wispy-like strokes coming from the bottom of the flower all the way up until about midpoint, like that. So you want to use these wispy kind of strokes where you're touching down at the beginning and then your brush is like lifting off the canvas and not really touching. So like wispy strokes like that. Go. If you I added a little bit too much gloopy, it's okay, we can fix that. Go. A nice dark border, and then we're just going to continue that on all of our side petals that we painted in the last step. So for the overlapping ones, we want to accentuate the overlapping part. So we're going to just paint that. And then the one behind, we're going to paint the border around that one. That. And then we're going to do those wispy upward strokes from the base of our tulip petals to about halfway point. And it's going to touch down at the beginning of the stroke, and then it's going to lift off the canvas at the end of the stroke. And that's going to give you those wispy, crisp, wispy lines like that. And we're just going to continue this with all of our tulip flowers. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be adding a slightly darker magenta to the back petal, because that is behind, and that's going to give the illusion of depth. And we're also going to paint those little horns on the unbloomed tulips as well. So we're going to mix a darker shade of magenta by taking pure quinacridone magenta in a pile, and then just a smidgen, just like on the tip of your paintbrush, just a little bit of black, and you're going to mix it into your quinacridone magenta. So that's going to be a shade of magenta, and we don't want it to be black. We want it to be like a deep maroon color. So if you've added a little bit too much black, go ahead and re-add a little bit more of the magenta to bring it to more of a maroon color. Should be like a purpley maroon. And then using our same small round brush, we're going to go ahead, I'm going to thin it down a little bit with water so it's a little bit more fluid. And we're going to add, first we're going to go ahead and add those little horns on the unbloomed tulips. So they're just small little triangular shapes that are poking through behind. And that's going to create a little bit, because they're also behind, they don't have as much light hitting down on them, so they're going to be a little bit darker in color. That. Okay. And if you find your pink is a little bit too dark, you can lighten it up with a little bit of adding more quinacridone magenta, or if you want, you can add maybe a little bit of white into it. Okay. So there's another unbloomed one over here. So I'm going to go ahead and paint that in. Grow. Then this one over here. And also, if you have chalk marks that are smudging a bit, don't worry, we can just use a paper towel and a little bit of water to wipe them off in the final step. Go. And then this one over here. It's a smaller. Oh. Okay, perfect. So the smaller unbloomed ones are done. Now we're going to take that purple and we're going to add a little bit of those upward streaky strokes to the back petal, and that's going to give a little bit more dimension to our tulips as well. So we're going to go right in between, and we want to pull that all the way up almost to the tip, but we can leave a little bit of the original pink still showing through, because that's going to give a nice beautiful layered look. now what we're gonna do is we can go ahead and move to the next step, which is we're going to add a lighter shade of pink and another layer that's going to be painted from the top of the tulip petal downwards, like how we did in the original one. The original step, we painted from the bottom of the tulip upwards. Here we're going to paint up from the top downwards. All right, so to do that, we're going to mix another beautiful color version of pink. And here we want it to be really vibrant. The quinacridone magenta that we have on the palette right now is very beautiful, but we wanted to give it a little bit more punchiness and juiciness to that pink. So what I love to do is I love adding just a little bit of fluorescent pink to the mix, and you're gonna see this pink transform beautifully. So I'm gonna add a little bit of that fluorescent pink right to the palette. And then I'm going to take my same mixture of 1 part quinacridone magenta and 1 part white to make that original pink. As close to that pink as you can. And then we're going to add in little by little that fluorescent pink, and you're going to see that it almost brightens it up, gives it like a luminosity. Now we're going to, once you find, so you want it to be quite a bit different, like a little bit darker than that original pink here, but not quite as dark as the pure magenta out of the tube. So we're just going to grab that on our brush. And then we're going to paint those brush strokes, as we mentioned, downwards into the dark pink. And also what we want to do here is we want to paint over the border, but not cover it completely. So right here we have quite a thick border that differentiates the petal from the other petal. We want to keep a very small amount so that we still get that dark shade right at the edge of our petals, which is going to give a beautiful distinction, but not we don't want to keep that whole thick border. So I think I'm going to add a little, I'm going to lighten that up a little bit more because I find it's very close to that pure magenta. So I'm going to add a little bit more white into my mixture. White and a little bit more of that fluorescent pink because I want a little bit more vibrant. Let's see if that changes things. Yeah. So this pink is kind of like a bright, I would say a bright salmon pink, if I had to describe it. And so we don't want to cover the border completely, but we want to go as close to it as we can, leaving about like a thin line of that original dark color, and that's going to give us a beautiful depth to the petals. And then we want to use downward light strokes to kind of blend right into that darker color. And also if you can try to follow the shape of the strokes to follow the shape of your tulip petal. So the outward strokes are going to be kind of rounded outward like that, and then the in ones are going to be curved inwards as well. That, and we don't want to paint all the way to the base. We want to leave some of that dark magenta paint at the bottom of our petals. So we're going to repeat this over all of our petals. So again, we're going to paint over that border, not cover it completely, leave just a very thin line, and then we're going to use those downward rounded strokes to blend that pink, that bright salmon pink paint into the darker one at the bottom. And we're not going to go all the way to the bottom. I'll leave some strokes there. And you can see in this step, your tulips are going to look a little bit more, even more realistic, because they're going to have depth and layers. right, before we move on to painting the lighter pink, what I'm noticing here is the darker petals for the smaller unbloomed tulips are a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go ahead, if you find yours are too dark and kind of not blending more into the background, let's lighten them up just a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add in that original dark quinacridone mixture that we added with black, and I'm going to lighten it up with just a little bit of white so it's not quite as dark anymore. And then we're going to go ahead and just layer on top of that. It should be dry to the touch, so we're just going to layer on top of it so it brings a little bit more contrast to that background, because we don't want the petals to be lost in the background. So there we go. You can see the petal a little bit more. That's the challenge with working with dark backgrounds, is the darker colors don't show as well. So to make your colors pop, just add a little bit of white and that should bring them right to life. So I'm going to do the same thing for this one. There. And then for this one over here. Go. And then also at the same time, if you'd like to add some more back petals. So as I mentioned in the earlier in the tutorial, tulips have a total of 6 petals. Here, most of them, we only have 3 showing, but you can, if you want, you can draw in or paint in some just little bumps like that, that just signify a couple more petals that are showing. And we want to do that with the darker color, the darker magenta, because they're going to be in the background. So there can be just little bumps like that. You can add like 1 petal on one of the flowers here. It's going to be on the side, so there you go. Perfect. All right, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix a lighter version of that very vibrant pink we painted in the previous step, and we're gonna add some nice wispy highlighted pink at the top of all of our petals. So what we're gonna do is, if you have any of that vibrant pink still left on your palette, you're going to move it over to another pile, and then you're gonna take some white and you're gonna mix it. I would say do half to begin with, and then you can work from there to see where your pink is at. So you want it to be a nice highlighted. So I think I'm going to add a little bit more white into the mix. And we want it to be quite a bit different than that original pink. And then we're going to grab some on our brush, so it's going to be a light pink. And then we're going to do those same downward strokes we did before, but they're not going to go all the way down they're not going to go all the way down the petal. They're going to stay about a quarter way down the petal, because we don't want to cover that all the different tones and variations of pink. We don't want to cover all of them. So we're just going to take our brush and we're going to just use these streaky rounded strokes. So we want to follow the shape of the petal. So from the top, we want to go a little bit outward like that, curved, and then inward, they're going to be a little bit less curved, and then outward, they're going to be a little bit more curved like that. And they're going to go about a quarter way down each of the petals. So we're going to do that on all of our tulip flowers. And remember, with the stroke, at the beginning of the stroke, it's touching down on the canvas. And then at the end of the stroke, it lifts off the canvas, so it's not touching anymore. So those are those wispy strokes we want. follow that shape too, which will give us that illusion that it's curved. That. Do it for all of the flowers here. And we want that border, that dark border that we left in the last step, we want that to show through as well. So we don't want to cover that. And you want very little paint on your paintbrush for this step. You don't want gloopy paint. You want, you can use your finger too to smudge a little bit if you want, to make it a little bit more blended. The more paint on your paintbrush, it's going to go on thicker and create less of the wispy look. We want more wispies. And you can use your finger to kind of blend. This one, I like to do all the big ones first and then focus on the smaller ones, but you can do any order you'd like. There's no right way or wrong way here. That. Go. And that way, in the end, there's going to be all the different variations of pink that we made for this painting. They're all going to show through. And it's going to give a beautiful variation to our tulips. So I'm going to do the smaller ones now with those wispy, rounded. And if I find they're a little bit too bold, I'll just blend them out with my finger. Go. That. Last one is over here. Blend. Okay, and then I might just go ahead and add a stroke or two on the side petals just to give a little bit of curvature and highlight. Like that. So we don't want to cover all that dark color because that gives the illusion of depth, but we can add a stroke or two. On those little horns. Very light strokes. If they're too bold, just go ahead and blend them out. Go. Okay, perfect. Now we're going to wait for this to dry and then move on to the next step. All right, now we're going to add a little bit more variation of color at the bottom of our tulip petals to give a little bit more of a curved look, to give more dimension. So I'm going to add, I want to add in a little bit of purple into this painting because I think it's going to bring a little bit more variation to the coloration. So I'm going to add in a little bit of dioxazine purple, just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to take the same brush we've been using, that small round brush, and we're going to pick up a little bit of that bright pink we have on our palette. And we're going to mix in a little bit of the dioxazine purple with it. So it's going to be it's a very cool purple. It's like that. You can add a little bit more pink. You can grab any pink from your palette here. We just want to mix, we want to warm up that purple just a bit so it doesn't look too like it doesn't belong there. We want it to blend nicely with all the colors. So pick up any of the pink you have still wet on your palette, mix it in with that dioxazine purple, and then we're going to grab a little bit on our brush. We don't want too much, we don't want it to be gloopy. And then starting from the bottom of our petal, we're going to make just a few brush strokes going up, curved ones like that. Like that. You pick up a little bit more. So I would say like 3 or 4 little curved lines. That's just going to give a little bit of variation to the petal. So we want to make them curved, go with the shape of our tulip flower. So just 2, 3, or 4 little strokes here. We'll give it a little bit more interest. And we don't want to go all the way up the tulip either. We want to stop about halfway up the tulip. So right from the bottom to about halfway, 2 or 3 or 4 little swoops. Following that curvation, or the curvature, I sometimes make up my own words, the curvature of the petals. Go. And if you find your paint is a little bit too thick, just add a little bit of water to make it a little bit more fluid, and it's easier to get those like finer lines then. On the smaller unbloomed ones as well. Add a little bit more of that. If you find that it's not giving a lot of difference in color, you can add a little bit more of that dioxazine purple to make it a little cooler, because the pink is a very warm pink, and adding a little bit of the opposite temperature is going to give a little bit of interest in the painting. And also here, if you feel like you've added a little bit too much of a color, you want to bring back a little bit of more pink. If you're liking the pink a little bit more, you can take a step back and see what you want to add. You can wait for it to dry and then add a little bit more pink into your flowers, or if you want to add, if you like the purple, you can add more purple. So just take a look and see what you want to add and tweak here. And then after that, we're going to add more like really small details to our flowers to really bring them to life. All right, so the next step is we're going to add some pure white titanium highlights on our petals, which is just going to bring them to life. And that's where the light is reflecting down, and it's going to really make them pop. So I've already started here with my smallest round brush and some pure titanium white. So we're basically going to be tracing a really, really fine line for the top of each petal, not the whole thing, but the top of each petal. And it's going to be not right at the edge of the petal either. It's going to be between that dark border and the pink on the inside of the petal. So we want that dark border still to be showing on the outside of the petal. So we're going to paint that white line on the inside as much as we can. So we're just going to take, and as mentioned before, to really get those really nice fine details and have more control over your brush, you want to thin down. If you're working with like a thick bodied acrylic paint, you want to thin it down with water so it's like a gravy-like consistency. So when you have like a really nice fine fluid consistency, then the paint should almost like flow from your brush, and you want to use just the tip of your round brush to get those really fine lines. So sometimes it helps just to even hold your hand steady to get those really fine lines. So again, you don't want to do it all the way around the petal. You want to do it just halfway up the petal and on the inside of that darker border. And you want to accentuate that little bump at the top of each petal as well. So I'm using just the tip of it. And if your paint is a little bit gloopy, then thin down your paint just a little bit more. Just like that. And you can see it just really makes the flowers pop on the canvas. So we're going to do that for all of our flowers, the ones that are bloomed and the ones that are unbloomed as well. So again, halfway up, and then on the inside of that dark border, we're preserving that dark border because that's going to give the illusion of the shadow on either side of the petal. Go. If you find your lines a little thick or it looks a little bold, don't be afraid to just use your finger to blend it out a little bit while it's still wet. Just like that. And do it for the bigger flower here. And if you have access to a paint pen, that would also work here too. A really fine tipped paint pen in white. But if you don't, a simple brush and thin down paint will do the job too. Go. So the next step, we're going to add the center portion of our tulip flowers. It has a little, tulip flowers have a little bit of a crease in the center portion of the petal. So we're going to create that with both the white paint and our dark purple paint. So one side, the one that the light is hitting down on, it's going to be a thin white line. And then on the other side, it's going to be a darker purple line. So in this painting, our light source is coming from the left. So all of the left petals are going to get a thin white line as a center crease. So we're just going to load up that paintbrush with that thin down white paint, and we're going to just create a thin line, curved line. So we don't want it to be straight. We want it to follow the curvature of the petals. So it's going to be slightly curved, and it's going to come about halfway down the petal. And if you want to just blend it out with your finger at the end, you can do that as well. So we're going to do that on all of our left-handed petals because the light source is coming from the left. A slight curve about halfway down on this one too, and you can start the curvature right where there's like that little bump, that little heart-shaped bump on the top of each petal. You can start it right at that the bottom portion of it. So we're going to do it for this one too. Thin white line. This one here. And this one, the smaller ones, we're going to try to add as thin as we can, smudge it out. And then for the smaller ones, we're going to add the darker color. So now we're just going to clean off our brush, and we're going to pick up that dark purple paint color that we used for adding those 3 or 4 streaks at the bottom. We're going to pick that color up. And if you don't have it, you're just going to mix a little bit of the dioxazine purple with any of the pinks you have on your palette that are wet. You just want to warm up that purple a little bit. Line. So we're going to do the same thing now on all the right petals. On all the right petals, we're going to create that center indentation. Maybe it's halfway down the petal. And in the center, that, and you can smudge it out with your finger to soften the edge. And we want it to curve a little bit as much as we can, not create a straight line. Curve with the petal shape. Go. All right, so now I forgot, actually, we're going to also add a center line on the back of all the back petals as well. So we're going to grab a darker color, like we can mix the dioxazine purple with any of the pinks to make a nice dark purple color. And we're going to add a little center line crease on the back petals as well. So you want that to be visible. So if you find that's not giving enough contrast, add a little bit more of the purple into your mix. And having it a nice fluid consistency also helps too. Nice center line like that. You want it to come about halfway down the petal, the nice curve. There we go, perfect. So we're gonna wait for that to dry, and then we're gonna add the little stamens coming in between the outer petals with some black paint once that center line is dry. All right, the last step of our tulip flower is adding in the stamens. So now the tulip flowers have a total, in real life, they have 6 stamens, but we don't have to draw all 6 or paint all 6. So we wanna grab our smallest round brush and some pure black paint, and we're gonna thin it down with a little bit of water so it's that nice gravy-like consistency. My paint palette is running out of space, so I'm going to move it over into whatever space I can find. And we're going to thin it down with water. Go, and then when it's a nice gravy-like consistency, we're going to pick it up the tip of our round brush, and then we're going to paint in some stamens. So they're really fine lines. I'm going to show you here in the completed painting, if you can see here. They're really, really fine lines that kind of, they're kind of like, they look a little bit like branches, and they have a little dot at the end. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create little branch-like fine lines and a little dot at the end. So if you want to be realistic, then you would add 6 or less. And if that doesn't matter, then you can add as many as you'd like. That's the beauty with painting. You can make it as realistic as you want, or as whimsical and whatever you'd like. There we go. One. And for the closed ones, we're not going to add the stamens there because they're not showing. It's only going to be for the blooming tulips. So I'm just going to add really fine lines and branch-like stems, and then little dots right at the end. So you can grab a little bit of that paint and then just dot it down, dot, 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 that. And then it adds a little bit more detail to our tulips. So now we're going to move on to painting in the stems of our tulips. So to do that, we're going to make a variety of green colors. So on my palette, I have cadmium yellow medium, I have black, I have phthalo green, and I have white. So we're going to mix them together to create a variety of green shades. Because we're going to have some that are darker, which are going to be our stems in the background, and then we're going to have lighter greens, which are going to be the stems in the foreground. So to make a lighter green, we're going to grab a little bit of yellow, and we're going to grab a little bit of that green, that phthalo green. We're going to mix it together, and it's going to warm up that green, because phthalo green is a little bit of a cool green, and we want like a warm green, a lighter warm green. Light green. So we have that one there. Now we're going to create a darker variety of that so we can use them for the stems in the background. So again, we're going to pick up a little bit of that phthalo green, and then we're going to pick up a little bit of that yellow so we can warm up that green. And then we're going to add just like a tiny drop of black, like right at the tip of your brush, because we don't want to make a too dark a green. We just want it to be kind of like an army green. And then we're just going to play around here and create a few more varieties of green. So just have fun and mix your greens with your yellow, with the black and white to create a variety of different greens. Okay, so I'm going to just keep these three hues of green, and I'm going to mix as I go. So I have right now on my palette, I have like a medium green, a dark green, and a light green, and I'm happy with those. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to grab that light green color, and I'm going to paint in the stems that are more towards the front of the jar, so which are the bigger ones here, because those ones are closer to our eyes, so they're going to be a little bit lighter. And I'm going to bring that stem a little bit into the tulip as well, so it's not just starting at the bottom. There's a little bit of wisps that are going right onto the bottom of that tulip flower, and I'm just going to bring it down. That. And I'm using my small round brush here. And you might find that on your first coat of green, it might be a little bit transparent and not opaque, so don't worry about it. Just continue painting in the rest of your stems, and then you can, once they're dried, you can make another layer on top and make it more opaque. Okay, so I'm going to add another stem right over here, and I'm going to come right into that tulip flower too, make little wisps so it doesn't look like it's just a stark edge. And then I'm going to just paint it downwards, this nice simple swoop down like that. And the stems of tulips are on the thicker side, so they're not delicate stems, they're nice and thick, so you don't have to worry about getting really fine lines for the stems here. I'm finding these stems, once they're dried, they are a little, they blend a little bit too much into the background. So we're actually going to not make them any darker. We're going to bring some lighter green on the other side where the light is shining down, and then I'll bring that stem right to life. Okay, so for these ones, we're going to use this lighter green here we have. And again, we're not going to put too much on the paintbrush, and then we're going to paint that lighter color on the top left side of the stems, because that's where the light source is coming down. And it can be, it doesn't have to be a solid line, it can be a little bit scratchy. Actually, will give it more realistic look. That. And paint those highlights right into the edge where it meets the tulip as well. Okay. I'm gonna do it for this one here. Oh. And then for this one, the light is hitting down that way, so it's going to be on the left side, the highlights. Go. That. Okay, and then finally that one there, a really tall and long stem. Just going to add it on the left side. I always get my rights and lefts mixed up. I remember even as a young girl, I would sometimes help my bus driver with a route, especially if there's a new bus driver, and I would always make my bus driver turn the wrong direction because I would get my rights and lefts mixed up. But they're super understanding about it. My system is I usually like use my hand to indicate the side I'm trying to explain. My brain just kind of works like that. Okay. So you can take an opportunity here to, if you have any of the stems that are, the edges are too solid, you can soften them out by adding some of that green. Oh, we didn't do this one down here. Okay, we're gonna add the light coming from on the left-hand side. There we go. Okay. Okay. So what I'm gonna do now is I wanna add, just like we added that white highlight on our tulips that really like brought them to life, and we're gonna add a little bit of a lighter green. We're not gonna add white onto this, but we're gonna add a really pale green and like a fine line where the light is shining down, and it's gonna really bring that to life. So we're gonna use that light green here, but we're gonna make it even lighter by taking, I'll put it in a pile over here. We don't need that much, we just need a little bit. So pure white, and just take a smidgen of that green. We want like a pastel green. A nice pastel green. So we want a nice contrast between this light green and this one here, but not quite white and not quite that green there. And then we're going to paint a really fine thin line on the left side of all of our stems. And it doesn't have to be like, like a continuous line. So try to make it a little bit broken up like that, because I'll add a more realistic look. So light is shining down on certain parts of that stem. And again, if you find the edges are a little bit too stark, you can just use your finger to, or a paper towel, or even a Q-tip would work well too. Now, once you're happy with your stems, you can choose here if you want to add a little bit of foliage. So if you want to add some leaves, we can go, and if you have like room for your leaves, you can do that as well. So here, let's add a few. So we can see the shapes of tulip leaves they're wide. They're very wide and they're pointed. But they also curve. Because they're so wide, they curve around the stem. So keep that in mind as well. Now it's time for our final step where we're going to be painting in our jar in a really fun technique. So I'm going to show you here what it's going to look like in the end. So we're going to create these really fun strokes of different colors on our jar, and then I'm going to show you how to blend it all out to get this look here. So the first step is you're going to add a whole bunch of colors to your palette. So here from right to left we have aqua green. This is the purple we used originally on the first steps. And then I basically just lightened that purple with a little bit of white. So that's the purple right here. That's quinacridone magenta. And here this pile has been lightened with white. And then we have our phthalo green and cadmium yellow, which I've mixed with white to create a lighter green. So you can play around here. You don't have to create my mixes here. You can just use any paint colors you wish. The base of the jar is going to be kind of like that turquoise aqua green color with those pinks, purples, and greens, creating the reflection from the tulips are going to be in the jar. So that's why we have those colors on our palette. So we're going to be just taking our small round brush and we're going to pick up the colors at hoc here. So I'm going to start out with this turquoise, aqua blue, and we're just going to be creating strokes. So the neck of the jar, we're going to be creating downward strokes, and then for the body of the jar, we're going to be creating these rounded ones. We're going to go with that curvature of the jar so it looks nice and rounded and three-dimensional when we're done. And so I'm going to create another one here. So we're going to add them in any place we want. So I'm going to add more of that turquoise color and more of those turquoise streaks on the right side of the jar, and on the left I'm going to put a little bit more of those pinks and greens. But you can do any design you'd like, as long as we do these curved strokes and also the downward ones here for the neck of the jar. It's going to give us a really cool look. And we don't have to wait for the streaks to dry to move on to the next color. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap because I'm going to come in between these strokes here and add different colors. And then on the other side of the jar, I'll add maybe one of the turquoise strokes here. We're going to add the curvature in the opposite direction, like that. And once we've filled in the jar with different paint colors, we're going to wait for it to dry, and then we're going to cover it with white over top, and then we're going to that look. We're going to get that nice blended look. All right, now once the jar is dry to the touch, we're gonna do that really cool like blendy look. So what we're gonna grab is our, I have like a smaller flat brush here. I think it's like a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. So any small flat brush would do. And we're not gonna wet it. We're going to we're gonna grab some titanium white directly on our brush. So we're gonna do a little bit of dry brushing here. We don't want too much. We want very little of this white on our brush, and it's nice and dry. And what we're gonna do is we're just going to, along with that curvature, we're just gonna add some of that white right over top, but we don't want it to go on too opaque. We want it to go on a little bit transparent so we can see some of those colors below. So it's gonna be a little bit scratchy. And you're just gonna use that same curvature of that jar that we used to initially put on all those strokes. and it's just going to create a softer look. So you're not going to see all those bold streaks anymore. It's going to be a little bit more subdued. That. And if some of the paint is tiny bit wet, that is okay. Sometimes having a little bit of those streaks in there give the painting more interest. So you can see compared from the left, is that right? That's left, yeah. From the left to the right, you can see the difference already. It's more like you can see the colors below versus as is. So just to remember that the center of the vase, the curvature of the vase is not as curvy in the center. And you can also switch over to the chiseled edge if you'd like as well to get certain strokes. And we don't want to add too much of that white on our brush. You want just a tiny little bit to get this dry brushing, scratchy kind of look. Oops, I added way too much. A big gloop. That's okay. Some areas can have a little bit more opacity. This is a perfectly imperfect jar. So let's have fun here, no stress. I'm going to use closer to the edge because it's a little bit of a tighter corner. I'm going to switch over to the chiseled edge of my brush to get those strokes like that. There we go. So when you're happy with the center of your jar, we are going to do the same thing for the neck of our jar. So just a tiny bit of white, and I'm going to use the flat side of my brush to go over it very lightly. I just want to soften all those colors a little bit. That. Go. Perfect. So while the paint is still wet, we don't have to wait for it to dry. We're going to switch over to our smaller round brush, and then we're going to create the rim of our jar here. So we're just going to take some of that turquoise, because the main color of this jar is turquoise or aqua green, and we're just going to create a little rim. It comes out just a smidgen from the sides. Just adds a little bit more of a decorative touch to our jar. Just like that. Maybe a millimeter or two comes up the side. Okay, there you go. And now what we're gonna do is, if you like the jar as is, you can stop the painting here. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add in some extra details here. So I wanna have a little bit more of that white, those fine white lines, which is gonna show a little bit more of that light reflection on our vase. So I'm gonna pick up my small brush, add pure white on it, and add more streaks of white along the tops of the jar. They don't all have to be the same length. That's going to give us a little bit more of that light reflection look, more opaque white lines. And they're at the top of the jar because the light is hitting down on it. That, and we can add a little bit to the neck too. That. Add a little bit more down here. I add just a couple going in the opposite direction, but not too many. You can take a step back and take a look. If you're happy with your jar, the painting is done, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a little bit more. I want to see a little bit more of that quinacridone magenta in my jar. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few simple streaks right over top. Not too many. Just want to bring a little bit more color back into it. And that completes the Springtime Tulips in a Jar painting. Thank you so much for watching and investing in your creative journey with me. Until next time, wishing you lots of love, peace, and color. Bye guys.